Greetings, my name is Jim Colonna, I'm a composer, and this is my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about my orchestral music. As a composer, I don't believe, just as a trumpet player, I don't believe we should focus in on one area or one style of music. It limits our ability to be expressive through the music that we loved and still love, and with that in mind, I'm going to talk about some orchestral things. I'm even going to talk about a little bit of swing and jazz and progressive music, and yeah, so a lot of different things with this. So orchestral music for me is a lot of fun to write because when I first started composing, of course, I grew up in the band world, so my influences when I was a young child are Alfred Reed and Claude Smith, and it was the 80s. And then, of course, Holst's First Suite and transcriptions of Tchaikovsky and transcriptions of Shostakovich. And that led me into some very strange places to figure out how to write music for orchestra, since I love mostly modern pieces. Not that the classical top 40 isn't important. The Berlioz Symphony Fantastique is a piece that I know that me and a very close friend used to listen to late at night in separate places as we fell asleep. Now, let's face it. I mean, Symphony Fantastique, as you fall asleep. It's probably not the best bedtime story. It's more like a dead time story. But it was still, nonetheless, some of my formative years. When I went into the Army band, I spent a lot of time playing band music, and especially in the military, you got a lot of what I call Yankee Doodle medleys. George M. Cohan, you'd have Cole Porter, which, beautiful songwriter Cole Porter is. I think he's one of our national treasures as far as songwriting. It's just beautiful music. And Jerome Kern, you name it. We played a lot of the Broadway hits. We played a lot of Sousa marches, a lot of Fillmore marches. You name it, if it was a march, we played it. It's the Army, that's what you do. And you are there to be the ambassador to the people between the United States military and the civilian population. Not only that, but we were performing constant ceremonies all the time. And my ears truly got tired of the sound of band. Winds, percussion, always the same orchestration, always the same sounds. And you got to remember at that time, I was 18, 19, so I was really embroiled in it. I really loved it, and that's what I was going to do. Until one day, I just couldn't take it anymore, and I decided that I needed to hear something new. Of course, I have always been a fan of Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland, so I started there. And then I started to go backwards into history, and then eventually found myself to Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, and various other composers. I happen to really love Poulenc. I really, really love quirky symphonies and quirky works. Prokofiev is one of my favorite composers of the Russians because all the quick modulations and the orchestrations and often things that are unplayable, yet orchestral musicians have found a way to play them, like piccolo parts that are off the end of the instrument completely, and yet we can still play them. Interesting to me that we do that. But if it were a band piece, maybe we wouldn't take that same path, which is sad. So when I was first asked to write an orchestra piece, I wrote a piece called Glee. Now, Glee is a piece for, I'm going to say like a grade 3, grade 4 orchestra. It was written for the Wyoming All-State Orchestra, of which I was invited to be the conductor, and that program had an outdoor overture by Aaron Copland. It had the Love Theme from On the Waterfront by Leonard Bernstein. And then I conducted my premiere of this new piece called Glee. I was still trying to get used to how to orchestrate, literally figuring out how to use the orchestra. So it's a little heavy, it's a little on the over-orchestrated side, and right now there's not a recording of the piece. So if there's any young youth conductors out there that would like to have a piece for youth orchestra, I'd be happy for someone to play it. It has quirky moments in it. It has a lot of homage to my heroes, David Diamond in particular, someone I love his music. My favorite piece of Diamond beside the symphonies is Rounds for String Orchestra. I think it's genius. It's such an incredible piece of music. So I wanted to imitate a little bit of that and bring that to the students in Wyoming. The piece is definitely interesting. The best performance was not at Wyoming All-State because as a young conductor conducting the piece, things just didn't mold quite right at the performance, and that happens sometimes. And I'm happy to say that when I attended Michigan State University, Rafael Jimenez conducted the second premiere with the symphonic orchestra, so not the top group, but the second group. It was very complimentary, and Rafael has since moved on from Michigan State and doing great things, I believe, at Cal State Berkeley. Wonderful to hear the piece. And it's still in my library. It's still something that I would love to have played, but it's sort of like portraits, which I'll talk about another time. I sort of like to throw it under the rug because there's other orchestra music that I've written that I enjoy that I've matured through. For chamber orchestra, I have a piece called Meditation and Dance. Meditation and Dance is actually two separate movements of two separate pieces that were originally for band. So the meditation movement came from a Beatles suite called Psychedelic Suite, which also is no longer available, mostly because I don't want to pay copyrights for anything I may or may have not quoted. And in the meditation movement, I was obsessed with Strawberry Fields Forever. So I spent a lot of time listening to that piece, to that song, and figuring out why I was so drawn to it. Why am I drawn to that? Why am I drawn to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds? What are the sounds that pulled me into that music? And in my life, I've discovered that I love to meditate. I love to find peace and solace and travel inward and see if I can integrate that outward, which can be very difficult. And the Beatles in the 60s and the counterculture, they were all about this in other ways. But at the same time, you know, the psychedelic movement that they were participating in did a lot of wonderful things for some people and did a lot of harm to others. So in my meditative state, in my place of innerness, I decided to write a meditative piece of music. And in the first movement, you hear lots of drones, so very Indian drone-like. And as you listen to the piece, there's a lot of electronic music that's being imitated, a lot of meditative music, lots of glissandi, lots of swoops, lots of swells, and things that make the music feel dreamy. And I think subconsciously there might be some quotation in there, but it's not outward, not intentional, and definitely not copyrightable. In the second movement of meditation and dance is a piece called Ants Boogie, and that was written for my son Anthony. I wrote that one Thanksgiving. I was visiting a friend, and the Friday after Thanksgiving I sat down and decided I was going to try to write something really different, something I've never done before. And I sat and wrote a bunch of chord progressions that were nonsensical. The whole point of it was to just get some new sounds out of me besides my chordal harmony, my points of imitation, things like that. And I had already learned so much at places like Michigan State, North Texas. Cindy McTee was a great teacher, Charles Ruggiero, great teacher, and yet I wasn't incorporating those teachings just yet. So this was my chance to try to do that. So I remember sketching out all these harmonies, and they're all extended, 13th chords, 11th chords, 9th chords. Wrote them out in a way that they're all extended. And then I said, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this and I'm going to write a dance. And I'm going to write it for my son, Anthony. So hence, Ants Boogie. Anthony, when he was younger, used to imitate Michael Jackson all the time and used to run around the house dancing. Good for him. He doesn't do that now. He's a bodybuilder. But when I wrote the piece, I was trying to capture my son in the music. So the music itself is a dance, but it's all extended harmonies. There's a swing section, there's a 12-tone-ish type of section. The harmonies are real dense, the harmonies are real tight, and they're supposed to be. The chamber orchestra, with this whole piece is for chamber orchestra. The chamber orchestra is a very small orchestra with very limited woodwinds, bassoon, clarinet, flute. I think that's it in that one if I remember right. And then the full string section, one percussionist playing multiple instruments, and piano, which is vitally important. You can't do it without piano. And in this piece, Ants Boogie, it's basically what you think it is. It's a celebratory dance, but it's using a little more edgy harmonic language than I was used to, and definitely experimenting with rhythms and displacing things because it's a dance. After meditation and dance, I took a long hiatus away from orchestra, because I was getting a lot of work writing for band again. And I would always think, I'm gonna come back to this. And when I come back to this, I'm gonna come back with new eyes and new ears. So I started studying other works that I enjoy. My favorite orchestral work of all time of the 20th century, and it will surprise people who know me, they think it's gonna be a Bernstein work. It's not. My favorite work is Harmonium by John Adams. I think that piece is one of the most beautiful pieces of the modern time. I think that it reaches a place of ecstasy that other pieces don't necessarily do in the 20th century, although there's so many other pieces I love. I love the music of John Luther Adams, Become Ocean. I love the music of, you name it, the guy Orgy Ligeti, Louis Falsky. I love all of this music, and I think it's all equal. It needs to be all performed, and we should all be a part of it. However, when I came back to an orchestra piece, I went way back into my Shostakovich love from my high school years. So I decided that when I wrote this piece, Joshua's Shop of Miracles and Curiosities, that I would write it with the idea that it would be in the same form as Shostakovich Festival Overture, but it'd be a little more modern. So Shostakovich starts with the fanfare, A theme, B theme, and then we just play around with those themes, and then we come to an arrival, and we turn back to the fanfare and the overture is over. I make light of that by saying it that quickly, but I think it's a terrific piece of music. I wonder sometimes if the band version that William Patterson did for the Marines sounds better than Shostakovich actual music. I don't know. I still don't know, and I'm going to just keep my opinion to myself on that, even though I think someday I'm going to discover the answer, at least internally. So I decided that I was going to start that way. So I write this big, massive fanfare. At the beginning, when the brass are all done playing, we go to an allegro. The allegro is pizzicato strings. And again, I'm aiming at like the grade 4-5 orchestra. I'm aiming at high school orchestras, college orchestras, youth symphonies. I'm sort of focused on that. The piece goes through quite a bit of variations, and one of the things that I loved about this piece is that I wanted to see what I could do with whole tone scales and octatonic scales. So remember when I said I studied with Cindy McTee. Cindy tried to explain to me octatonic. I learned it the best I could, couldn't use it, disregarded it, and now came back to it. It's just what happens in the evolution of your sound and whatever is going on up there. So I came back to this and I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So there's octatonic, there's whole tone, and they contrast each other, and then we return to this very major fanfare. And I mean major as in key, not major as in big bang. We return to this fanfare at the end. It ends octatonic and with a beautiful swell. Now Joshua, who is Joshua? The Joshua Shop is for a friend of mine named Joshua P. Warren. He has this really interesting, sometimes goofy podcast called Strange Things. People that know me know that I love all these esoteric thoughts. I love the idea of spirituality, I love the idea of God, I love the idea of magic and things that are a bit of wonderment. And Joshua's show is all of those things, right? It's a combination of all those things. And I read a book that he wrote called Use the Force. And it's all about this idea of serendipity and manifestation, and I needed it at the time because I was going through a tough time. When I read the book, I put all the steps into action. Not that I thought I was becoming a Jedi necessarily for real, but I was learning how to find my peace, how to find forgiveness, how to find gratitude, and how to keep myself open to the possibilities of all things positive. Because Joshua's book hit me so strongly, I wrote the piece of music about Joshua's book, right? So if you ask Joshua, it's not really him as much as it is all the interesting things that he's involved in. So the piece it's a mystical, Sorcerer's Apprentice type of piece in that sense, but definitely in the style of Shostakovich. So my orchestral pieces are limited. I have one other piece, my Fanfare and Adeste Fidelis, which I'll talk about in another video, has been adapted for orchestra. Thank goodness. I took out some of the things that my 26-year-old brain thought was okay in the band version and rewrote that in the orchestra version. It makes much more sense to me now. And I'd love for that to get performances with pops orchestras and youth orchestras and high school orchestras during the holidays. But that's the extent of my orchestral writing. I have toyed with the idea of moving the Pursuit of Happiness into an orchestral version, but I'm going to need some encouragement to do so. So if you are an orchestral conductor and you have spent the time watching this video and you got to this point, thank you. And go check out The Pursuit of Happiness performed by Arkansas Tech University. You can find it on YouTube. And when you listen to that recording, if you think it would make a great orchestral piece, I'd be very willing to slide it over into that realm as well. The orchestra is very fun for me. It's something that I want to keep doing, but I don't get the opportunities like most of us. The orchestra is still a museum, whether we like it or not, still a museum who prefers to play old 18th century dead white guys, and that's what keeps the audiences coming in. Although programming has become more evolved and more interesting over the years, Baltimore Symphony is a really good example of that. I think that we as orchestral conductors, or we as composers who are looking at the orchestra, who are coming from different areas, like I come from band, people come from jazz, we get intimidated with the fact that there is such a history. So when we sit down to write the piece of music, we really have to be under a situation where we know it's going to get played. And so that's going to require things like commissioning. That's going to require a conductor. In my case, a couple times I have pieces for chamber orchestra and soloist, which will be a totally different video. We need to make sure that we line up all the ducks. Right? We have to make sure the conductor is interesting, a board who's going to allow this to happen, either a commission or a performance because somebody knows somebody who knows somebody. The idea that there's this mystique around the orchestra that doesn't seem to surround the band as much. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you'll take a listen to the works, which I'll link below, and hopefully we'll start getting some performances of my orchestral works as well. Thank you very much. Have a great day.